I mentioned before that Vulcana supports young professionals, but I should mention that GeoTenerife also is very passionate about this, and is always supporting very young and talented people. So now we're going to see one example. We are going to listen to Javier Díaz Cabrera. He's a master's student. He's from Gran Canaria, and he studies meteorology and geophysics at the University of Granada. He graduated in environmental science at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and he's interested in emergency management, especially in the Canary Islands, and he's here as an intern from GeoTenerife. Thank you, Javier.
Okay, thank you so much. I also want to thank Sharon for encouraging me to participate today. Today I'm going to be speaking about a pilot study which we conducted during this summer's GeoIntern program, in which we studied volcanic readiness in Vilaflor. So this is just a brief outline of what I'll be talking about. Like, I'll be introducing everything, why we're doing this, the methodology we followed, our results, a discussion, and some recommendations that we made from our research. So firstly, this is everything that Alba has already said. Just what I've been doing. I've done a degree at the University of Stirling. Then this summer, I participated in the GeoIntern program. And this autumn, I've just started a master's degree in meteorology and geophysics at the University of Granada. So most of you will ask, what is GeoTenerife and what is the GeoIntern program? Well, this is a program prepared for early career researchers, which really focuses on science communication, extensive field work, and you also get a lot of time with local experts. And the good thing is that the results that you produce are actually used in the Volcano Stories project. So why study volcanic readiness in Tenerife and specifically in Vilaflor? Well, to begin with, we have in Tenerife a large resident population, but we also have a lot of tourists. So if we sum this up with the fact that we have explosive, effusive, and hydrovolcanic volcanism in Tenerife, the result is that we have a really complex emergency setting. And why did we study Vilaflor? Well, firstly, it was located in close proximity to where we stayed during summer. Then we also thought that it would be a representative example that could be applied elsewhere in the Canary Islands. We also thought that the fact that Vilaflor had an aging population would be interesting when it comes to evacuations and emergency management. And we also went to Vilaflor because it's a small town, and we thought that we could really listen to everyone and get in contact with the people, because how are you going to manage an emergency without knowing who the people are and who you're working with? So regarding the methodology, the first thing we did was a buildings and infrastructure survey. So we walked throughout Vilaflor, looking at roof types, the age of the buildings, and how they were constructed. We also conducted a residence survey in which we also walked through Vilaflor, asking residents a questionnaire of 15 questions that was designed to be of short duration, so we made sure that everyone answered all of the questions. And we also set up a table in the middle of Vilaflor so that residents could come and complete the surveys. And finally, we also spoke to representative figures in Vilaflor. So, for example, the mayor of Vilaflor, the local police, the BRIFOR captain. The BRIFOR are the Brigada Forestal, which are the forest firefighters here in Tenerife, and we also spoke to the staff from the school summer camp. So what were our results? Well, to begin with, we saw that over 60% of the buildings in Vilaflor had flat roofs, and we also saw that a considerable amount of buildings were old and were built before 1930. When it comes to the resident survey, we saw that 60% of the people were aged between 35 and 54 years. However, we also saw that a significant portion of the people were aged over 70. It's also noteworthy to see that 56% of people move by car. So you see that people are dependent on cars in Vilaflor. And finally, we also thought that was interesting that almost 30% of households said that they would require assistance in the case of an evacuation. We also, amongst other questions, we also found out that 84.3% of the people felt uninformed by authorities regarding volcanic hazards. We also saw that when it comes to obtaining this information, people trusted the most the local town hall and the police. But what was the most interesting was that only 1.7 answered that that they thought of scientists as a reliable source of information. We also found out that the majority of the people felt either very unconfident, or not sure on the accuracy of updates that they would be provided with during an emergency by the local authorities. When speaking to the figureheads in the community, obviously I would like to thank all of them for spending some time to speak with us. For example, Agustina Beltrancano, the mayor of Vilaflor, said that she really wanted to see a consolidated discourse between the IGN, the Involcan, and CSIC when it came to volcanic hazards and emergency management. And she also mentioned that during an emergency, who the people trust the most are the army and the police, because they view the army and the police, they see them in person, working with them. And for example, with scientists, as they're not in person with them, they don't trust them as much, or they can't rely in them as much. Then, while speaking to Carlos Viloria, the local policeman, and Miguel Angel, the captain of the firefighters, both of them said that they were very understaffed. So in the case of an emergency, the first thing they would have to do is contact policemen and firefighters from other municipalities to come and help in Vilaflor. Another thing that we found really interesting was that Carlos Viloria said that during an emergency or an evacuation, they depended on loudspeakers to conduct an evacuation. So if you think about it, if you're living on the fringes of Vilaflor, it's quite possible that you might not hear the loudspeakers. So what will you do in this situation? Hopefully you will hear it. So what do all of these results mean? Well, having such a large proportion of flat roof buildings is a problem, because if you have a volcanic event, you can have intense ashfall. And what ends up happening is that the accumulation of ashfall on the buildings can result in their collapse. While walking through Vilaflor, we also saw that many of the streets were really narrow, as you can see. So you have a parked car, and maybe another car can go through this space. And basically, the issue with this is that during an evacuation, this makes the evacuation effort much more complex. Also, if we take into account that people in Vilaflor are dependent on their cars, well, you can expect to have congestion or even accidents during an evacuation. When it comes to demographics, as I said before, we've seen that there's a there's a significant elderly population in Vilaflor. And this is a real issue, because during an evacuation or an emergency, taking care of these elderly people is much more complex than handling a younger population. And also, we found out that it's really useful to have a single discourse during an emergency. So in this way, people won't receive different informations, and they have one single discourse that they can really understand. If they have some people saying X stuff and other people saying Y stuff, they're going to get confused, and it's going to be much more difficult to do any kind of evacuation. And finally, what we also saw that was really beneficial was having a periodic interaction between the population and the scientists to build this bond between them. So having produced this pilot study, we also thought that we could offer some recommendations. So the first thing that we thought was really interesting was that a lot of the respondents were used to or knew about forest fire hazards. And we thought that informing them about volcanic hazards through forest fire hazards was a viable option because, for example, if you have a lava flow coming into Vilaflor, that can be explained in the same way as having a forest fire front coming into Vilaflor. Then we also thought that scientists need to increase the engagement with communities. Also, going back to the beginning of my presentation, there's a lot of tourists in Tenerife, so we also would need to produce evacuation plans and any kind of information that we produce in English or even in other languages. Thinking about the aging population in Vilaflor, we also need to think about how we provide them with this information. So we need to make this information much more accessible. So for example, with the use of pictograms for people that can't read, etc. And finally, what we thought would be really useful, as there's still people that might not have access to social media or the internet, was to provide written information, because maybe in the case of an emergency, there's a loss of mobile data, and you always can fall back on the written instructions that you might have on your fridge or something like that. And linked to this, we decided to produce these exemplar pamphlets where we include information on the forest fire hazards and the volcanic hazards. So in this way, the population have all the set of the information, and then they can also make comparisons between both things. And for example, maybe these pamphlets, they can just stick it on their fridge and forget about it, but when they really need it, they're always going to have it there. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to my fellow colleagues, Isabel, Jack, Brooke, Carmen, and Wisdom, that took part with me during this pilot study. Thank you so much.